Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Workflow Wednesday. This week we have with us Heath McKnight, a journalist from RedShark News, and
All right.
looks.
Hello,
Is that?
everybody.
Oh, okay. There we go. I do that myself. All right. So, for everybody at home who may not already know who you are, give a little bit of an introduction, who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Houston. So, my background is I was a very independent filmmaker, and I also taught film in the 2000s. And I have not been doing a lot of movies in the last decade. Instead, I've done more like video production, everything. And about 10 years ago, excuse me, I started working from home for a company called Top 10 Reviews. I would review all kinds of cool computers and televisions and stuff. And then for about 6 years, I worked for a company called Dawdle News, and we were one of the leading filmmaking news sites out there, a little bit like RedShark News. And for the last couple of years, I've been working for a company called Commerciant. We do software for businesses. And I've also been doing some writing for RedShark News. And I go back with them a couple of years. And a great company. I have also written for Video Maker, Movie Maker, DV Info. Man, a lot of the big ones that some of them aren't even around anymore. A little bit with No Film School as well. So yeah, just a lot of experience doing that. I had like a 10-year gap between making 10 or 11-year gap between making movies. So my two most recent short films were 2007 and 2018, and a little bit of trivia. The writer is a guy named David McLeany, who co-created some of the greatest comic book characters. He co-created Rhodey on Iron Man.
Oh,
He
wow.
created Venom from Spider-Man, and Todd McFarlane gets a credit, but he created most of that. And so it was really cool to do two short films that he wrote and everything. So, and I'm also a long time Mac guy. Not to age myself too much, but I got my first Mac in 1994 when I was 18.
Hey. All right.
I have worked with Windows, and I've had this Puget system, which is a good segue for you. And I really enjoyed it, and it just blew me away. But what's interesting, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, is that I was actually using Vegas Pro with it, and really enjoyed it, and it just really held up. So yeah.
Oh, that's good to hear. Because and that's actually two really good interesting points. Because a big reason why I was excited to have you on was that kind of crossover and sometimes there's almost abrasiveness. There's that Apple versus PC, almost hatred really, and so it'll be very interesting to hear some of your perspective on the difference, and especially with Vegas Pro, because I think Vegas does work on both Mac and PC. There's an option there, yeah.
Actually, it's Windows only. But what's
Oh,
interesting, and I'm probably I don't know if I'll catch any flack for this, but I remember I was like a very early adopter, like immediate adopter of Final Cut 10. And
okay.
yeah, a little bit of the UI was a little bit like, or a lot like iMovie, but
Mm.
there were so many other benefits to it for me. Of course, there was such controversy 9 years ago when that happened, that even Conan O'Brien's editing staff did like their own little joke video about it.
Oh,
And they
wow.
did like an ad for Adobe and everything. But yeah, I've been using Final Cut since like probably after it came out in 1999. And one of the things I noticed, going back many years, I co-wrote one of the earliest HD books when HD cameras were no longer 100 gram, but they were like 3-4 gram, like the old Sony, the old JVC and stuff like that, and
Mm-hmm.
the early Panasonic tapeless, like the first tapeless cameras, which blew my mind. And which now it's like, you're like, geez, Heath, you're really dating yourself. But mini DV tape with HDV was hot back then.
Oh, yeah.
But I used Vegas. The book that I co-wrote was with a guy named Douglas Spotted Eagle, and his old company did a lot of training with Vegas. And I've noticed sometimes when I'm in Final Cut, and if Apple wants to, you know, throw a rock through my window for saying this, but I noticed some UI similarities, and I guess, you know, that's okay, because I've noticed a lot of, you know, as time goes on, a lot of these nonlinear edit systems kind of are very similar, and that's good. So if I'm going to be going from my iMac right now, which I'm on, cutting Final Cut, and I need to go to like a Premiere or on Windows, or if I need to go to Vegas on that Puget system, it's pretty good. And I think you can, you know, kind of take your keyboard shortcuts and kind of adapt them to what you're used to, which is really cool. Or, you know, like me, I just throw it all out the window and get used to something. So, but yeah.
You take a little bit more of a brute force kind of method. You kind of learn how they present it to you.
Yeah, and I'm a weird guy, kind of like that. Like, you know, I was telling you before the show that I'm a triathlete, and I did an Ironman and everything. And I took the brute force approach, going from a regular old road bike to a triathlon bike. And it's weird because you're like way down on it. But that's kind of like, sometimes in my mind, it's the only way to really get used to something. Because like years ago, I would just kind of like say, all right, yeah. And then my adoption rate is low. And we talk about that a lot. You know, when I was working in TV news stations, and we were one of the, if not the first station in West Palm Beach years ago to go Final Cut. And it was, the adoption was tough because people were used to tape. And then, you know, a lot of stations moved to like Premiere, or they had News Cutter, all these different things. And it's like the adoption was always low, unless it's just like, okay, we're going to take away that option. We're just going to say, hey, go for it.
Just have to.
You know? Yeah. And I'm not going to lie. And if anybody's watching, please feel free to laugh at me. So I have not really used Windows very much in the last, I'd say, 16 years.
Wow. Okay.
At the TV station, I was using Windows NT for like scripts and stuff. And then I was on Final Cut, or I was tape to tape. So I dabbled a little bit, like doing reviews and stuff. My wife is a graphic designer, and for our local county, and she's on Windows and uses Windows and everything. I had to have her sit down with me and kind of give me a little, you know, instructional on Windows 10, because I've been Mac based forever. And I think there was maybe a 1 year period between 98 and 99 that I was strictly Windows, and I went back to Mac and kind of went back and forth for work and everything. So yeah, I'm a weird guy like that. I'm like OG kind of Apple and everything. But that doesn't mean I hate Windows. You know, there's that war. Like, don't talk politics, don't talk religion, and don't talk Windows versus Mac, right?
Right. Yeah.
Don't talk Android versus iPhone. Don't talk here versus Final Cut. So you know, this is all good stuff. It's fun. I have a lot of fun with it.
That's a cool perspective to come from too. Is like, I've fairly been somewhat agnostic in that way as well. Like, they're tools, and they have a particular use, and some people are, you know, just more familiar or more comfortable with a certain way of doing things. It doesn't make one better than the other necessarily. And so, okay, so you say you had to have your wife sit down and help you out. What was a big struggle? You got the machine, you got it all plugged in, turned on, and then so what was one of the first major hurdles for you in okay, your sit down? And
as funny as it sounds, it's the file structure. So I'm so used to like the UI of Mac, which is Unix based. So I'm so used to that. Like, again, I didn't have the beta for Mac OS 10, but in March 2010, I went out and paid the $130 and installed it on my laptop. And my best friend, who's like a brother to me, he's such a geek that it was like the biggest deal for us, you know, like, you know, you know, everybody else is like, hey, we're going to go to the club. What are you doing? Well, I'm going to go install this software and it works. And, oh, wait, I can't use it for 3 years because it took, or 2 years because they didn't have Final Cut ready for, you know, but it's the file structure was kind of a big deal for me. And my wife had to kind of walk me through it and show me. I felt like I had never used a computer in my life because it had been, years since I used a Windows system. Right. And like when I was working for Donald News, if a company said, Heath, you want to review this workstation, this Windows workstation, I'd say, just send it to my guy out in California. He's strictly Mac and strictly Windows. I mean, because he has to have both to do these reviews. So for me, you guys can laugh at me, but that's kind of like one of the hurdles. And,
Yeah.
you know, but I kind of look at it as maybe I should have been using Windows, even with Boot Camp, although I hear that's going to go out the window with the new
That's
process.
unfortunate.
Yeah, and I hope they do something because I think it would be good. But I think like for me, if I had been dabbling a little bit more, it would have been okay. But the big thing is once I kind of got through that, and my wife, who used to be a teacher, had to put on her teaching hat and say, "All right, come on now." Everything kind of got out of my way, and that's what I wrote in my review. It gets out of my way. If I'm sitting there worrying more about what's going on and having to really sit and work things out. And once I got the keyboard shortcuts, and it just got out of my way, and I could sit there and I could just start creating. I could start editing. I dropped in a couple of clips from my last film, and just, again, I mean, we shot my last movie on 1080p, and people are like, "Wow, why aren't you shooting 4K?" And I'm like, guys, I'm delivering to YouTube, and film festivals are probably still just doing things off like a laptop or something on a projector that doesn't go above like 1080i or 1080p. So,
Right.
but we got the film look and everything. It was an old FS100, which is that the one? Yeah, the one, the S35 sensor. And I'm like, holy cow, this looks fantastic. And
Oh, great.
so but it got out of my way, and I cut my movie on Final Cut 2 years ago on my old iMac, and it got out of my way. But I'll tell you, for fun, recently I did an article on 8K, a couple articles on 8K, and that is such a monster to download Red, HDR, you name whichever camera, and you can download like a minute. And I loaded it as a proxy, and it was no problem. But then I'm like, well, if I want online and the client says I need to deliver it in 8K because, I'm going to take it over here and we're going to be doing some major stuff with it, so you can't, deliver it 4K. My poor iMac, just trying to play that 30-second clip. I was waiting for the white flag to go stop. And I haven't fully tested it, but I started throwing some stuff at the Genesis station, and it was just like, okay, all right, yeah, well, what else you got? And right. So that's good. And I mean, I'm a tried and true, dyed in the wool Mac guy, but I know that to get an equivalent system would cost probably double. I didn't fully spec it, but I think it was coming out to like nearly double.
Wow.
So
yeah.
That's something that a lot of people consider. I know a lot of people left Mac in Final Cut in 2011, 12 with Final Cut 10, and they had to choose some of the best systems out there. And so in Houston, if you want, I can talk about my experience, because I got to go through like the phone call with Oscar, like I was a client, and to me that was really cool.
Yeah, I'm interested too. Is like the difference. So you're coming from that sort of customer service angle. Is there a comparison there with Apple? Like, I'm curious. I mean, I'm biased. Obviously, I work for the company and stuff. But yeah. I also hear from other YouTubers and stuff about the customer service experience from other, I hesitate to say competitors of ours, because they tend to lean more toward like a gaming or enthusiast market. But sure. From a professional, from someone who is in a more creative professional aspect, how has that? Is there a direct comparison with Apple and our service?
Well, I haven't had to call Apple in a long time. I would just buy a system, and I knew how to spec it out. But I would say that if I called them up and I said, can I talk to somebody, that gets video production, they have people there, and I would probably be able to talk to them and then figure out a system. And that's one thing that you guys did. Now, it's, I'm not trying to knock any direct competitors, but I know that sure. Like if I'm going to go on and look for a system, it's probably going to end up having to be a gaming system, because it's just about apples to apples what I need, not just for now, even if all I'm doing is cutting 1080p, and dabbling a little bit in 2K and 4K. I need something that I can use for years to come. But right. It's nice to be able to say, okay, Oscar, and I'm not going to lie, man, I'm kind of right here. and other people I work with are up here. They're doing red. They're doing all kinds of stuff. But that's not to say I won't be. And you know, I bought a 4K TV 7 years ago, and it was not cheap, and now you can get them cheap. And what I'm saying is, the content is starting to really come in, and all of a sudden, all these movies I bought on Apple or got, like, you know, if I bought a Blu-ray, I got a 480i or 720p version. All of a sudden, I have a 4K version. You know, I'm going to have a client one day that's going to say, hey, listen, we're just going to go straight 4K. I need to be able to handle it. I cannot have my core system crash. And it's funny, we used to judge everything on CPU speed and RAM. And while that's still important, GPU is more important. And I'm not trying to diss my little iMac here. This is a good computer, but I did not choose a good enough GPU, in my opinion. I think I should have gone a little bit more. And if I were back doing full-time video editing, I'd have a Mac Pro for sure, or a Genesis system, because it would pay for itself quick. You know what I mean? So, like, I guess I'm an enthusiast, but you know, sitting on the phone and, like, they're asking me questions, and you know, like, I'm kind of also old school, where when I was working in news, when I was working in production houses, it was a separation of church and state when it came to graphics, animation, and video editing. So when they had that, we had our real estate crash in Florida in like 06, 07, and the rest of the country in 08. A lot of these guys, graphics, animation, editors, a lot of us were actually unemployed at the same time. And I was able to kind of roll into a couple of new gigs before I started doing the writing thing. And a lot of them are like, I'm having to learn how to do video editing. I never had to do that because I was just After Effects. I was just, you name the system. I was doing that in Photoshop. And I'm like, yeah, me too. But now when people go to school or they take classes somewhere, they have to know it all. And if they see a job opening, it's like usually it's Premiere, but some of them use Vegas, some of them use Final Cut, some of them use DaVinci, but they also say must be able to use Photoshop or Nuke or whatever. And that's what they want. And you can get away with some of that with plugins, but only for so long, you know? So. So
yeah, I've noticed that too. Like, in seeing some of the configurations we build, there'll be like a primary use. Like, I spend most of my time in, you know, After Effects, but I do still need something that'll work well with Premiere too, because like I'm doing the visual effects, but I'm doing visual effects for 4K footage, and so I need to be able to blend those together and have a system that works strongly for a lot. So. Yeah, that's interesting to hear that there was such a separation though between, or I guess suppose there used to be, because now, you know, everybody's got to wear multiple hats. I mean, I'm a bit of a video editor myself now, and I never thought I would end up being that way. So
you're right, and that's why, like I said, listen, you know, there might come a time when I'm going to be dabbling a little bit in After Effects, dabbling a little bit in Photoshop. But let's say I need something major, like, you know, I can do Photoshop, but I might need something beautiful, rendered, and that's where my wife comes in, because she's been a graphic artist forever, and she's a wonderful graphic designer, and she would go in, and if the computer, again, it's my whole thing about it, if it's too slow, then it gets in your way, then you know you're in software, you're not turning off your mind and creating. And I remember the first time I ever used screenwriting software, Final Draft, it got out of my way. It sped me up. So then the first time I used nonlinear editing software, which was an old version of Premiere, then Final Cut, I felt like I could create, and I wasn't sitting there like how you would do pre-roll on your player deck and your record deck, and you couldn't change anything. You'd lose a generation and everything because it was tape to tape, but it gets out of your way. But again,
like that.
Slow, you're in trouble. You're going to be, hey, I'm going to go take lunch, dinner, and maybe breakfast before this is done rendering, you know. So to me, that was key, and Oscar took that all into consideration, and then sent me the configuration where it was able to do what I needed it now and later. And also, if I have to bring in another friend of mine and say, listen, you know, I know you could do this on your own computer, but can you just give me this animation? Do you want to try it on this? Because it's fast and it won't cripple the system, you know? So that's a big one for me, and that was fun. It was fun to sit there like a customer and go through it and tell them what I need, and not have them say, "Really, that's really okay," and get it and understand that, kind of more old school. But who's to say I'm not going to sit down and really make sure I know this stuff?
Sure.
But again, I've been mostly an enthusiast for about 10 years now.
Yeah. I think you brought up an interesting point about kind of like the software kind of getting out of your way and the time aspect. People tend to, in my experience at least, people tend to kind of miss that, or at least from the outside, they tend to miss the idea that like, a $7,000 machine, man, that's expensive, right? You get all those parts. That's
Yeah.
half the cost. But people tend to forget that like the time the time that you save in work, like the difference between 15-minute export and an hour can mean a difference between an entire chunk of your movie being either cut or not, or with graphics, visual effects and things taking sometimes minutes per frame or seconds per frame, and that's huge. And people, I think, tend to miss that part where, or if something, you're trying to scrub through something and it chugs and and now you're out of your flow, or I think that's an important thing to highlight is
Yeah, and again, if you're really, I mean, I have a friend who works with, he has his one or two big clients, and then he kind of works his way down. And I think that's almost any company. So you have a couple of top tier, middle, a few more, and then you have a few smaller tier where maybe you're not going to be charging them, an exorbitant amount of money. But one of those gigs, one of those big gigs, it may cost you because you're not delivering on time. And I have a little client. I used to have a little client, a tattoo parlor down in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm actually sleeved up because of them.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, mostly Marvel comics, but Iron Man and everything. But I remember we started by I would do little videos for them and for commercials before they went more just like online and got rid of commercial advertising, because the Facebook and all that was really working out better for them. And he's like, "Hey, can you help me out? I need you to get this delivered to me." And this is 8 years ago. I'm about to take off to Colorado for a family reunion, and I'm like, "Yeah, I'll get it done." And I'm on a little Mac Mini, and I remember I bought it the year before, and I said, "Well, for $200 more, I could get an iMac with a dedicated graphics system." I'm like, "No, I'll save my money." It burned me. I could not deliver the final project. And while I didn't lose him as a client, he was like, "We really needed that." And there was nothing I could do because I was getting on a plane soon after.
Bummer.
So I got him the video, but then it was a good lesson for me to say, okay, this is what happens when you don't. And if he was more of a video-based client, he could have said, "You know what, we're going to have to go with somebody else who can deliver it." So I'll tell you, when I got back, I bought an iMac. Like within a week, I was able to sell the old system, didn't lose a lot of money, got the iMac, never had that problem again. And again, if you're going to make a serious investment and you have serious clients, one of those clients will probably pay off that system pretty quick.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So time is money. And when you said scrubbing, that's what happened to me with the red footage.
Yeah.
But it's just, I was just having fun. But after a while, it's like if it's going to be paralyzed, then it's not getting out of the way, unless you drop the quality to like a proxy or something like that.
Right. But even still, doing proxies, that takes time. You got to like, I'm unfamiliar with the verbiage, but I know that takes time to kind of translate those into proxies to play with that and that kind of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's really important. So we do have some questions from the chat. This was a few minutes back, but this one's actually coming from Twitch. He says, "Hey Heath and Houston, what do you think about Apple's switch to ARM? Do you think that will drive people back to the Mac?" I like the rhyme in there.
Back to the Mac. I think Mac was still doing pretty good. I think they've always been, I hate to say it, kind of niche, but then there was a study done a little while ago that said that, and this is when HP was the biggest computer manufacturer, they were actually sometimes losing money, whereas Apple was making money. And you could probably argue that a laptop from them costs way more than a laptop from somebody else.
Sure.
But what I think is going to be interesting is the theories I've been reading, right? So I've been reading like the old CEO of Apple. I think his name was Jean-Louis Gasset, if I'm saying his name right. He was coming up with some theories that I thought were interesting, and that was that it may force other chip manufacturers to go that kind of ARM architecture route, which for them they call it silicone, so it's not fully ARM. And I also follow another couple of people that are big on YouTube, and they're big Mac journalists, and they talk about that as well, that it could force Intel. And somebody who was at Intel, or no longer at Intel, said that Apple was the most vocal customer for them, but they represented a small amount. But the problem is they kept promising these chips, and it's a little bit of like history repeating itself with the old PowerPC and IBM. It was, we're going to deliver this chip, and it's not going to be hot, and you're going to be able to use it. It never happened. I think it may have been the Lake chips, I forget. And they could just like, so you would buy a system and it was the same thing, and they were just making the same processor. So they're now going to be able to control that. They're going to be able to give people what they need, and it's going to probably force a lot of other chip manufacturers, and maybe even Intel, to get rid of the x86. Now I don't know if that'll happen, but we'll see. I'm really curious if that'll happen. I think people will be curious what happens with Apple and these ARM processors. I'm excited. I am really excited. I know they just came out with a new Mac yesterday, new iMac, a new iMac Pro. But it's like, I don't need a new system right now. My wife's like, are you going to get one of those first MacBook Airs with the ARM, with the silicone? I'm like, not yet. And she's like, darn, because I want your Air. And I'm like, I'll give it to you. but I mean, it's our computer. But for me, it's for sure. I think it's gonna help out a little bit. But I'm really curious about boot camp and Windows, because there are people that love to game, that love to do a lot of stuff and everything. And my wife lives on the MacBook Air. I bought it for both of us and everything, and she's fascinated by what's going to happen. How quickly will we see updates with Photoshop, with Premiere, with everything? Apple will probably do it. Now, can we go back to when they switched to Intel and they said 2 years and they got it done in a year? Maybe, who knows? But I'm curious, will it bring more people back? Will it bring people back into the fold? And Intel is making a ton of money with servers, with their high-end chips. That's where they're making a lot of their money.
Yeah, that's something else that people tend to miss. Like, okay, AMD is kicking Intel's butt, like, in the CPU space, but that's in the consumer market. People tend to forget that Intel, like a huge chunk of Intel's like profits come from either custom chips or that sort of data center high-end desktop almost sort of data centers and things like that. They miss that part. So I'm curious to know if this will have any effect on price, because I think that is a big I think that's a big stopping block for them in competition with regular PC adoption. Is oftentimes I can get better performance, and this is more toward like productivity tasks or content creation or whatever. I can get better performance for half or less. I have a lot more choice in the hardware, and that sort of a thing. So I'm curious if that'll have an effect in that space.
Yeah, and it's truly the walled garden times 10. And the story is they asked Intel if they could, create a chip for them for the iPhone, and they didn't. So they made their own, and then Intel apparently thought they were gonna be part of the iPad, and they said no, we're just continuing with our own chip. And it's interesting because in the early days they were using other technology, and I guess there's like 2 guides that you could do. Sorry, that's my little alert there.
I was like, oh, did I do something?
So there's 2 guides, and I guess one of them is more like almost like you're licensing the technology, and then the other one is you're following some of the instructions but doing it yourself. And Apple made a transition to doing that, and now they're really controlling it. I mean, they are controlling it a lot. Will the price change? I don't know. It'd be interesting because, I got the iPhone 11 Pro,
Hmm.
and I would say equivalency. It's about the same price as probably an equivalent Android phone,
Sure.
like a fancy Galaxy or some like really slick. And they're again, I don't hate everything. I'm not going to say, but they're all really slick and they're all about the same price.
Yeah.
I I used to argue with people about that, the quote unquote Apple tax, and at the end of the
Sure.
day, you can't really get away from it. But I also remember a buddy of mine got a Dell laptop, and I had gotten an old, I guess it was the first like editions of MacBook Pro, and no joke, and his Dell was nice. His Dell was
Sure.
toast in 3 months. He
Oof.
had it at the end of the year to get his tax write-off in, and got a big sale at the old CompUSA. I think it was CompUSA, and then that was it. And
Wow.
he was so mad, and he got it fixed. And sorry, Dell, because I used to own the Dell and I loved it. But this is a few like a decade plus ago. But I used that system for 3-4 years, and
Yeah.
I tend to use my Macs until they're dead. But in the past, as my clientele, I was building my clients in the 2000s. I noticed I had to get a faster Mac, so I would constantly upgrade and everything. But I'm really curious about the pricing. I mean, that's probably a long way around
Yeah.
it, but the walled garden, I think, is going to be the biggest thing of all. Now
Mm-hmm.
Apple is controlling even more. They're controlling their own graphic, chips, or that maybe they'll bring in, really great, chip. I'm not thinking on the professional level. They're thinking on the, more consumer MacBook Air level, I'm sure.
Right.
But those of us, that small percentage of us that doesn't have, $15,000, or I think if you spec out a Mac Pro, it gets up to like luxury car, like
Oh
60
yeah.
grand.
Oh well, yeah. There was when they were first announcing it, there were people who are cranking them out to the top, and it's 50K, 60K,
Oh,
with the $400 wheels and things like that.
yeah.
So, but that's again, there can be a justification there when you get to that 5 figures for a machine, because like we've done things like that as well.
Sure.
Um, that the person who is even genuinely considering spending that kind of money on a system, there has to be a return on investment. Those minutes that they're saving are thousands of dollars
Yeah.
of time, and so yes, you and me, we're not spending 10 grand on even 10 grand on a workstation, because it would take me 12 years to get my return on it. But there are people out there who need 30 seconds shaved off of every 3D animation they do, that need those kind of small improvements, because over time they're probably not going to buy another machine for 5 years, and it'll pay for itself after 3 projects.
Yeah.
And so it's just a disconnect between consumer market and professionals.
Oh, I mean, as an avid triathlete, I did an Ironman. We were talking about that. I had a little $700 road bike, and it got me where I needed. But when I signed up for an Ironman, where you're on the bike for 112 miles, I needed, and then I have a marathon after. I needed to be able to have a bike that could handle it. So suddenly I stepped up to $3,000 plus, I had a little discount, but a $3,500 plus tax bike got
Yeah.
me that much faster.
Yeah.
And when you get into the pro triathletes, where $100,000 in sponsorships are on the line, then you're getting a bike that's 15, 20,000, and it is so identical to me. And there was a guy that does a lot of this stuff, but production. But for him, he likened it to the surfboards, because he's
Sure.
surfing. So he said, I'm okay with this surfboard, but this pro needs the Ferrari of surfboards. And I'm like,
Right.
it's really interesting. And then there are those of us who have money to burn. I'm not one of them, that can buy that kind of stuff. I knew a guy that when he retired, I was helping him learn. I said, you didn't really need to go out and buy a $5,000 camera and a $10,000 edit system. And he's like, trust me, I can afford it. And I'm like, but you're getting, fun videos and stuff. And he's like, no, I'm going to dabble. And he did. He started dabbling in other stuff. But for for the most part, we buy what we need and what we can afford. Sometimes it does pay when you can shave off a few seconds. If you're buying a $50,000-$60,000 system, you might even not be doing production. You might be crunching numbers and mapping the galaxy or something like that. You need that because, you know, any system would probably be like, all right, just give me about 3 years and I'll be ready to go.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
What was your favorite thing about I'm trying not to make this a plug for us and things, but just your favorite thing about working with the PC.
You know, I'm gonna go back to it. It's getting out of my way. I know that sounds weird, but I just need stuff to get out of my way. If I'm spending time on a computer, trying to figure out what's, you know, why is this not working? Why am I exporting, you know, 6 different versions? Let's say Houston hired me to shoot and write, produce, direct, edit a 30-second commercial, and Houston is a PR firm for Xbox. So this is big budget. It's going to be in 4K. I'm going to hire an animator. We're going to have a lot of fun. We'll say that we can get and be around people right now. So
sure,
there's no pandemic, so we're able to shoot. And I need to be able to export this in 4K, 2K, 1080p. I need to be able to get this video all the way down, and I don't want to waste my time doing them one at a time. I want to be able to start it, and then maybe I go down and make dinner with my wife, and I can go back up and it's done, and it's not sitting there chugging along. Right. I need to be able to, and because Houston is a very demanding boss and very demanding client, and he wants that right away, and I got to get that uploaded, you know, because he's out in Washington, I may be in Florida, but I got to get that uploaded so by 9 a.m. Pacific, it's ready to go, you know.
Right.
So I need a system to be able to do that. I need a system that won't lag, that if I just want to do something as simple as scrubbing, I'm not going to paralyze the poor computer, you know. The monitor is really slick too. I really like it. Good. If you're into a lot of color correcting, that is something like your color grading. That's a big deal. You need to have it accurate. I remember the days before you had those, you had to have a broadcast monitor to make sure, because broadcast video, NTSC was a whole different, you know, color. I forget the word. I'm like dying here. But when you get into HD and 4K computers, that at least matches. So that way, when I'm doing my color grading, it's going to be good. And I'm more of a casual color grader. I have a friend he is kind of like an unknown known guy. Like, people know his work, but they don't know his name. And he does it. He'll even help people out and say, use these filters with these adjustments, charge them $200 for a little student film, or $50, or for free, all the way up to some major stuff. And he's got a full like $50,000 system because he's making a lot of money. Sure. And but I'm more like, you know, try to do it in camera as much as possible, although clients also want to shoot raw, and so I got to make sure that I can color correct this and get it to where the client wants, again, without crippling it. And as these systems kind of become more all in one, and I'm not having to go between 6 different apps to do my work.
Right.
I love that, but then it becomes a monster of software, and just it doesn't paralyze the system, you know, with one computer, you know. So yeah,
that's cool. And so is that something you do encounter with your normal day-to-day system?
No, not as much unless I'm killing it. But I remember a few years ago it did that poor little Mac Mini that I was trying to do stuff. Hold on, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Messaged me. They're like, "Hey, what's up?" And I'm like, "Hey, I'm on a call." But you know, that was a huge lesson learned. I remember having to do that often in the 2000s, where I did have demanding clients, and all of a sudden I'm like, I better trade this in. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, we're coming out with this new program, and it's built into the software, and you're like, oh, cool. And then the software now needs more RAM, it needs better GPU, and you're like, oh boy, all right. And it's all starting to become more and more built in. Like Apple bought that color app. It was a beautiful app.
Oh, yeah.
Bundled it for a while and then put it in the software. So all of a sudden it was no longer a separate app. But again, it makes it the software that much more RAM, GPU, CPU intensive. And I know for a fact that as everything updates over the next 3 to 5 years, that system will still be going. It won't be like, don't take this wrong way, it won't be growing a beard and getting old and needing a cane because the core system is dying from it.
Right.
And I like your beard, by the way.
Thank you. And I have to say that was something I noticed. So you had mentioned like how the Dell laptop had died. Your buddy's laptop died in 3 months, and I was thinking, I have a MacBook Pro from 2012 in a closet somewhere. I bet I could pull that out, turn it on, and it would just wake right up, no problem.
Yeah.
However, I do recall that as the OS updated, and I think that kind of ties to what you were saying about how the software can get kind of bloated and whatnot. There was a point where I did an OS update to, I don't know, Mojave or something like that. I can't remember. Keep track of the code names, but and it would take 3 minutes to just to fully be able to use my desktop on the Mac and stuff. And so I wiped it and put it back to where it was. Yeah, like that. That's actually probably the same one.
So
the June 2012 edition.
Actually, it's a 2016 or 17. I got it discounted because I didn't need something fast. And I updated to, I think it was in 2018, and I was like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
And then it started saying 2019, and I'm like, oh boy, it's getting slower.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget the names of these. And then this most recent one, I'm sorry, it was fall of 2019, that the computer, I'm like, I'm fused with 8 gigs of RAM. I can't go higher than 8 gigs. This new, and if anybody from Mac is looking, trust me, I love you guys, but if you don't have enough RAM for some of these new Mac OS 10 versions, or Mac OS, I think it's called, you are in complete trouble.
Yeah.
And it's a little obnoxious. It still says you have an update, and I'll say, remind me tomorrow. And I guess I could go into like deep into the UI and put something in, but it's like, that was me about 10 years ago. Now my brain doesn't follow that stuff, but I would like an option to like not have to do that, because as soon as I do that, and if let's say I do it again in 2020, it's just going to grind it down, because you're going to need that much more. And I'll tell you, my first system was the original Power Mac G3. It looked like the iMac. So it was the Bondi blue, and it had the monitor look like a giant iMac.
Yep.
When I spec'd that out, it was 128 megabytes of RAM. What are you going to do with all that? And then the startup drive was 9 gig. It was a CD-ROM and not even a CD burner. And I had to pay as much money, $3,000, for 4 internal hard drives that totaled 125 gig, because there's nothing bigger than 37.5 gig. And I told people, they're like, what are you using that for? And I'm like, I'm trying to make an independent film on digital video. And they're like, who's shooting digital video? And it's 16 millimeter film. But my point is that dropping in more RAM helps that. But if it's fused on the board, you're in trouble. Yeah. And I'll tell you, if you try to update, you'd be in trouble. And I remember I had a 2011 MacBook Air, got rid of it in 2014 because I wasn't using it. I had to actually go back to Lion and then go back to Mountain Lion, because anything above it's like I dropped red footage uncompressed on the timeline. It slowed down. So I think that's something, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but that's something that with the Puget system, again, I don't have to worry about it, because I think there's like just enough RAM in there, a great GPU, and I'm sure that in a few years I could call up and say, listen, what can I do with this system? I need to upgrade. What can I do? And I'm sure I'll talk to you guys about that. Even just like, all right, I can't upgrade. Let's just get a new system going here.
But even still, like, especially with the way PC hardware is right now, oftentimes it's a simple matter of, like you said, more RAM or just a better graphics card. So much of especially video editing and stuff is shifting over to GPU compute stuff. yeah, it's
I'm
mind blowing.
I come from the CPU. I mean, it's just a lot of people are like, "What is this fool talking about?" But I'm old school enough to know that the GPU was important,
Sure.
but more important if you are doing graphics and animation. All of a sudden, if my old Mac would sound like it was about to take off because the fan would kick on, the Zoom video was on.
Sure.
It couldn't even handle that, and it couldn't handle certain resolutions of HD or 4K. It would just,
Yeah.
I'm like, is this computer about to fly away because the fans were chugging to keep it cool?
And
You
it wasn't that long ago um, that like a dual Xeon like super workhorse machine was the best option you had for Premiere Pro. And like people are still kind of have that mindset where like, oh, I need 128 cores, I need all this CPU power, and it's sometimes difficult. Thankfully, we have a lot of data to kind of support our position in this, and people are realizing more and more now that Adobe has, and DaVinci as well, and all these editing programs are leaning more heavily on the graphics card for a lot of that stuff. So yeah, it's interesting to see that shift.
Yeah. And, you know, Oscar told me, he said, you know, we've got the 18 core, we got the 14 core, but this monster of a GPU
Hmm.
really helps out there. And then you got to think to yourself, well, how much money am I going to save then?
Yep.
Because in my mind, it's like you got to go to the top with the CPU 15 years ago, 10 years ago, but now you don't.
Right.
And I noticed that Apple put out a new graphic card option, and it's like, it's that much cheaper, and you feel really good about spending the money, and you're not spending another few $1,000s going, you know, how many cores can I get in there? Well, you don't need those cores. What you need is a good graphics card. If you don't have a good graphics card, you will, what did that guy on South Park, the ski instructor, you will have a bad
Oh
day.
yeah, you'll have a bad time. That's right.
I'll say that to myself. I'm very pop culture oriented in my mind, and my wife I'll say I'm having a bad time because I'm just killing the system, you know, and being on that system back there, it's my wife loves it because we each have our own office, so it's in her office, and she's like, that's a beautiful computer,
Oh,
and I'm like,
cool.
it is, isn't it? Because I've got this, you know, being a triathlete, I got my bike in the corner here, I got
Right.
my wall of geeky Iron Man artwork, so
That's cool.
I needed a place to put it, but you know, but the big thing is buy what you can afford.
Hmm.
And I hope you do go with Puget, because I'm big on customer service. I really am. The company that sold me this bike and my triathlon bike, the CEO told me we're big on customer service. You want to be able to call somebody up or email them or chat, and you get a real person, and they'll say, let's talk, let's see what your budget is, what kind of a solution we can get you. Not all of us, even though we love to sit like I do late at night having a beer on the couch, and I'm like, so what does it cost today to spec out a full, you know, Mac Pro, or what does it? And I also said, what does it cost to spec out a Puget system all the way? Because that's kind of dork I am, the kind of nerd I am, kind of geek. But you know, I don't need that. I don't need a $15,000 triathlon bike and like great computers, their new next year's model is $1,000 less, and you're like, and that much better. So you're like, oh, you know, but you know, for me with the computer, as long as 3 years from now it's still getting out of my way. If all of a sudden now we have 12K, so we have 12K. So they said, you know, let's turn it up to 11. No, we're going to turn up to 12. So now Blackmagic has these awesome cameras coming out that do 12K.
I've heard, yeah.
And I don't need to shoot it myself, but I love to do reviews. I love to get gear. I need to be able to handle it, and that system will handle it. And when Houston calls me and says, I love that Xbox commercial, now we're going to do one for Jaguar, but we're going to be shooting in 32K, that computer, you know, better be able to at least down res it a little bit, and then we can do a finish. So I always think about today and tomorrow. I need something that can do both. Otherwise, you're going to end up like me with that one client where, it didn't really, he wasn't upset that I took an extra week because my little Mac Mini took, like, no joke, 12 hours to render. When the iMac I bought soon after only took 2 hours to render. It was a long project.
Yeah.
But the point is that I mean, 12 hours, 2 hours. That's the
huge.
difference of losing a customer, an ongoing customer, a potentially ongoing customer. And I think time is money, and
Oh, totally.
and so yeah, without spending too much money.
But no, I mean it's I think that's again, like, that's something people tend to miss when they aren't like knee deep in it. Is like, yeah, it's $5,000-7,000, but it's important to balance that with your workload and workflow. Because yeah, maybe you just aren't working with that kind of footage or with those sorts of projects that require it, and so it's going to take you too long to break even or make a profit, essentially.
Right.
And so and those are the kinds of conversations that we have to have with customers too. Is like, well, look, we'll get quotes from people who are like, oh, I can totally afford this, but it's like, do you really need it?
And that's another thing that I like about that is that you're not gonna upsell me. You're not gonna tell me that, well, Heath, for only $500 more, you could get the XYZ. We'll throw in some wheels for you.
Yeah. We got
It's
some.
like a car. You're looking at a car. I mean, and sometimes it makes sense. My wife and I love to sometimes go and look at. My dog's looking at me like, it's dinner time, but. But we look at a house and it's like, for only 10 grand more, you get a lot more space, and it almost makes me think they need to rethink that, because more people are going to pay the extra money, but it's not like I totally need it. And if it's going to kill my budget, and really one thing us creative people sometimes forget is that these are tools that let us express our talents. And if you're not what became popular was, 10 years ago, not 11 years ago, was kind of suddenly just, you're doing it all yourself. Like, I worked for a company that laid off everybody and hired or kept anybody who could do everything. So you're suddenly a jack of all trades.
Right.
And I don't want to say expert in none, but kind of. And all of a sudden, I need to be able to do all this work and not have to worry that maybe the computer isn't super, and maybe that the camera isn't a Red. Why would a Red be, no offense, because I have friends that work for Red, why would a Red, if I went out and spent, let's say the Raven was still for sale, spend $15,000, when as an artist, it's not going to make me that much better.
Right.
My dog is not running around.
I hear that all the time. It's not the camera, You can,
and
a $10,000 camera isn't going to produce a $10,000 value film.
Painful lesson that I think every generation of filmmaker goes through, whether they actually do it or not. I remember having a Canon XL1 that did a great job, and I got so seduced by the first HDV camera from JVC, which I forget. I think it was I forget the name, but it was garbage. It was really bad. And then Panasonic put out another mini DVX100, which was better. But this camera was so awful, I couldn't wait to get rid of it. And but I fell into the trap, and all of a sudden I bought a camera I didn't need. And I liken it to triathlons. I liken it to cooking. My dad was a chef, and he would tell his students in college, you do not need to go pay $6,000 for your cooking gear. You just need what you can afford. You don't need to buy that Viking oven for, no joke, 10 grand, when a $2,000 oven works just fine.
And I think that's kind of an angle that Puget takes, is like, I hear stories all the time of our salespeople talking people out of a more expensive item, because it isn't, especially in creativity or creative aspects, it's not what you spend on your tools, it's being able to use them effectively. And like, it comes back to that theme of just getting out of the way. Like, if you don't have to spend so much in order to achieve the vision that you have. there are times where going above and beyond will allow you to do more things,
Yeah.
but it isn't always necessary to, you want to have maybe. Uh-oh, did I freeze?
Nope. No, here's my little dog. I was just saying hi. She's
Oh, I
now,
think
dog's
I
telling me it's dinner time, but,
I
uh,
bumped my camera. Hang on.
sorry. I was just showing both my dogs are coming over, but you know, I would say the biggest thing of all for me, and you and I were talking about this, is we, when I was writing screenplays on Word, it took me forever. So then I bought Final Draft and other screenwriting softwares. It took care of the formatting for me. I am from an era when we would do tape to tape, working in TV news, whatever, college, everything. Then nonlinear came out. It got out of my way. It let me quickly create. It let me do things I didn't know I could do, and that's like one of the coolest things about this system and with the creativity. And I'm not sitting there getting suckered into it. I can say, hey, I have 10 grand, and your sales team will say, have you bought a camera yet? Well, I hadn't thought of that. Why don't you budget out your computer for maybe 6 grand, and then your camera and your gear 4 grand, or
Right.
maybe you could spend a little bit more on the computer or a little bit more on the camera. And I'm like, wow, really? You guys aren't going to try to upsell me to the Jaguar,
Right.
Mercedes Benz, 7 Series BMW, that kind of a thing. When I don't own any of that, I had a little Subaru. So yeah, that's what I also really like. Again, it all comes down to, for me, is customer service too. It's like, I know that the system's going to work well. I know it's going to last a long time, but I love that the customer service is there too. That's a big deal for me. And the social media is fun too, which is a little plug for you. Sorry, I'm showing my dog, but when both dogs are conversing on me, I'm like,
I love it. I love it. And we should do a bit more of a series of like Puget pets.
Yeah. We just adopted a little tiny senior dog. She's like 10 and like about that big, a little Maltese.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool that we did that. So.
Oh, that is awesome. Actually,
Yeah.
we work with a local. Just completely off topic because we're right near the end here, so
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. But we work with a local, I guess, charity that works with rehoming old dogs, called Old Dog Haven. And yeah, we worked with them to get them, I think, a video editing thing because they do little clips of their dogs and stuff, and I follow them on Instagram, and it's super cool. Like, people, man, old dogs are much like old cats, in my opinion, too, because I've adopted a few old cats in my time where, it's sometimes it's cool to just have like a chill companion.
And she is, and she's excited, like I came down, she's so tiny, she's a Maltese, she can't go up the stairs. Yes, I'm talking about you. And she's really, my wife made her girly with, like, she's got this.
Oh, that's cute.
So, but for her, somebody would probably have adopted her, but everybody's more everybody the puppies, and for me, it had always been a dream of mine. And my other dog, they're both 10 years old. She's been with me since she was a puppy. She's always by my side. I worked from home for 10 years. She's always by my side. Mm-hmm. If I get up, I call her American Express dog. She's everywhere I want to be.
Aww.
Oh, I have to go over here and get my laundry going. She's right there,
Yeah.
So, but I always dreamed of getting like a little tiny, not a tiny, but like a senior dog, because you know what, they deserve it. You don't want them to be stuck in a shelter or a rescue. And the rescue we got it from Barky Pines is awesome. It's kind of like on a farm. They have cows and stuff. They have a rescue tortoise, believe it or not.
Oh, cool.
I mean, well, in Florida, sometimes you get some exotic animals like
sure.
Tigers, and that's all I'll say. You know where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's cool, and I really, kind of wrapping up. I know I tend to kind of go around. I guess I like to talk a lot, but the Puget system, I'm not trying to go too crazy with like marketing, but it really is a great system. The customer service is probably what I would say I love the most. And I think anytime that you can reach out and say, listen, this is what's going on, or hey, this is my budget, without me saying, well, these guys are probably like, oh, I don't need this dude that only has this much money. I'm looking for the guys that have that much money. No, you guys are there, ready, and you're also not like, okay, I'm gonna have to pick out which gaming system to make it work,
Right.
because selling so many consumer $200 laptops, maybe an office needs like 1,000 of them, for their corporation, and that's fine. But you guys get the need, and then if I do need a $60,000 computer because I'm mapping the universe, then I can reach out.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that's funny you mentioned that. I think we have worked with a few, because like you'll play around with the configurator and you can only go so far. But if you start talking with the guys on the phone, we've done a system or two in the $120,000 range for those epic mega, yeah, epic super. I can't remember exactly what it was for, but it was some outrageous scientific computing thing, and yeah, it probably is real time mapping like the stars or something. But yeah, like
That's kind of like
we're there for you.
the old story where you go to the bank or you go somewhere and they're like, and then you're like, well, this is what then we need to come to the back room and show you something to nobody. And then you guys open up the curtains. Oh,
Kinda. I'm always telling people, because that really that those conversations apply across the board. We've been putting out recently a series of articles about like good, better, best configurations for whatever software package. But even still, the best thing you can do is to talk with one of us, because it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. You're not just using Premiere. You're not just using AutoCAD. It's never just one thing. And so there's going to be a mix and match of trying to get you the best solution for your problem. And that's you can't just do that on your honestly, you can't really do that on your own. That's what we're here for. That's why we have a business. That's why we're the experts. Your job is to create cool movies or to build buildings or engineer a bridge. Your job shouldn't be to focus on what tools, we're the ones who tell you what you need to get that job done.
it is fun. It is fun. I'm such a
Sure.
guy that it is fun to it's like I still get excited. It feels like Christmas when that box comes in and you get to pull it out and you hook it up and you're like, you hit the button and you're like, oh yeah, and you get in there, or you get the camera and or my new, then new phone or whatever. It's always like it's so much fun. And then if you're a super nerd like me, then you enjoy sitting there and downloading your software and you're like, all right. And it's just, that's kind of how I've always been, and so, but again, if you get seduced by the gear, you're going to end up broke. You really are. You're never going to really be able to break even on it. If you're, and that $60,000 camera is really not going to make your movie better.
Right.
It's getting out there and making a bunch of very low budget movies and working your way up. And it was a painful lesson for me because I thought that camera would, it didn't do it. And then getting my talent to where it needed to be. And of course, people would laugh and say, oh, and you only shot it on that camera. Ha, ha, ha. And I'm like, my cinematographer was awesome. We were able to do a lot of cool stuff on it. And, and I think it looks good, but, I think overall, I don't want to take, because I know we got to jump, but get on the phone and configure it out. Everybody will help you out. Don't be afraid to say that you only have this much money, because there's always something. And get what you can afford, but don't get something that's going to be out of date in a year or two. That's a big problem as well. Sure. Because like you were talking about, you update the software, you may paralyze your system within a couple of versions of the software, especially as it becomes more like HDR and crazy stuff like that, where it's like, holy cow, I never knew that had that much data. And then you're like, my computer, speak to me. So, all right, man, that was awesome.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for stopping by and chatting with me and kind of giving that kind of Apple and PC perspective. Because I don't like to perpetuate the versus talk. We're all trying to do the same goals and stuff, and how we get there isn't all that important. It's just interesting to see the differences.
Yeah, totally. And the fact that a lot of this software more and more is rendering real time, or the computer, the GPU is helping, that's probably the biggest thing of all. You know,
Mm-hmm.
some software still has trouble, and then they update it, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh baby, now it's taking, you know, that graphics card. And it's funny to like throw it up and you see the CPU is actually not doing much, but the GPU is humming along, and that's cool. And one more thing I want to
Yeah.
say,
Sure.
while they were building the computer, there were updates, and I could log in and see, and then they're taking photos, and I'm like, yeah, there it comes. That was cool too. That was really cool. In fact, I used those photos for the article, because I'm not going to be able to come anywhere near that kind of.
Aw.
So that to me was cool, to be able to say, hey Heath, I'm so and so, I'm putting in this, I'm going to test it now, and then, you know, I'm going to run tests, but you guys did extensive testing. And that's awesome. And it's not like you're shipping out the computer and I'm going to be like, so what am I getting here? And I already know. I knew the whole journey to when it arrived. I thought was super awesome. That was cool. I don't think I've ever had anything like that before.
Right on. Well, thank you for that. That's cool to
And they're
hear.
not paying me. Puget doesn't pay me. I just had a lot of fun with this.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
cool.
Well, yeah, all right. Well, again, thank you for taking time out of the day and joining us for our Workflow Wednesday today. And thank you to the audience as well for joining us. We do this Wednesdays and Fridays at 1 o'clock Pacific. Wednesdays, we bring in an industry expert to kind of talk about their workflow and you know, their experiences with different softwares and the industries and things like that. Fridays, we have a member of our labs team come on to kind of just answer questions from audience and kind of talk about what they're experts in from the kind of crossover of hardware and software testing that we do. So be sure to, you know, mark your calendars. We'll be back you know, every week we do this. So you know, hope we see you there. And again, thanks Heath for joining me today.
Thank you. And it's an interesting cross to go from Windows to Mac, and Mac, you know, Mac to Windows. It really was. Once I got it, it was fun. It was fun to just get in there and work.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Well, all right. Well, again, thank you, and we'll see you guys later.